Ashke Zinctala is a big part of what makes everything here happen and be possible. Ashke probably checked you in. She probably will check you out. Ashke probably had a part in making sure that you have a place to stay and food to eat and all kinds of other wonderful things this weekend, and also plays a part in making sure that we have plants that stay alive and grow and will thrive and create a forest of food and so on. So Ashke's very skilled gardener that grew a lot of food at our last center, more than we could eat, and will grow even more food here, and is also a family member of the community and a friend, and going into yet another year of training with our teachers and our tradition as well. And so we're super grateful that Ashke and her partner Ian are here holding it down, making things happen. And Ashke is also a certified clinical herbalist and nutritionist that just graduated from her clinical herbalism certification program. And so I enjoyed attending that graduation, and I'm excited for this presentation. I know people had some questions from Nick's presentation related to extraction and all that, so we can bring that in for Ashke and yeah, see what happens. Yay. Woo!
Cool. Yeah. Cool, thank you. So this is kind of a pretty broad, big topic to cover in kind of a short amount of time. So if anyone has any questions at all throughout the entire thing, feel free to interrupt me and ask. I have some stuff prepared, obviously, but like wherever kind of direction this wants to go, that's cool too. So really, the big question for this topic is how do we forage and grow herbs sustainably? And also included in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about herbs of commerce too, because I think it's an important part of the conversation when we're talking about sustainability. So yeah, like asking what can we grow, what can we forage, like what is actually possible for the area that we're in, how do we do those things ethically and sustainably. So first, identifying and kind of defining these two things, bioregional herbalism and herbs of commerce. So bioregional herbalism is, anyone have any ideas around what bioregional herbalism might be? Anyone?
It's just being specifically knowledgeable about a particular region of plants because there's so many of them.
Yeah, exactly. Anyone else? No?
About the plants that... I think bioregional means like about the plants that live in that region of the area you're talking about.
Yeah, totally. And I would also include invasive herbalism in bioregional herbalism, because there's, so like exactly, it's like knowing what plants are in your region, what plants are medicinal in your region that can, you know, perhaps substitute some of the plants that are generally in herbs of commerce, like on the market. So like knowing the qualities of the plants that you're looking for and what plants in your area might have similar qualities for that medicinal purpose that you're looking for. And then like invasive herbalism, bioregional herbalism, something like mullein is incredibly invasive in this area in particular and incredibly abundant because of that. So being really opportunistic when you're foraging and looking for herbs to harvest. And then herbs of commerce is kind of the other side of that. Herbs that are sold, herbs that are typically, about 60 to 90% of herbs of commerce are actually wild crafted, which is one of the things that we're going to talk about that can be an issue with herbs of commerce. So there's a lot of pros and cons to both bioregional herbalism and herbs of commerce. So just looking at these pictures, can anyone think of some of the pros of bioregional herbalism, which is what this woman here is doing? She's harvesting from her environment in seems like a really peaceful way. So yeah, anyone think of a pro of bioregional herbalism? Yeah.
A symbiotic relationship.
With the plant and the person?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Creating that relationship, really like taking the time and space to sit with a plant and form that relationship, ask its permission if you're going to harvest it. And, you know, a really big part of ethical harvesting is one, asking permission, but maybe not even asking permission to harvest right at that moment, but like really making sure you have a relationship with whatever plant you're trying to use for medicine, especially if you're the one harvesting it yourself, before you actually take it from its home. So, and then a con of bioregional herbalism. Can anyone? Yeah.
She looks like she's going to get sunburned.
Sunburn. Okay, great.
Over harvesting so that there isn't any left for anyone else.
Yeah, exactly.
I was going to say over harvesting as well, but also not just left for anyone else, but deteriorating the supply in nature.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, also there's that relationship part where, like, you know, this woman here, she's creating that relationship with the plant that she's harvesting, whereas over here you see, you know, buying supplements, it creates a level of separation between you and the plant that you're working with. And, you know, I use supplements, they're great, but it is a different type of medicine for sure. So, yeah, pros of herbs of commerce. Oh wait, we didn't talk about that. So what could a pro of herbs of commerce be? Anyone? Yeah.
Access to herbs that don't grow in your region.
Yes. Yep. Convenience, yes, absolutely. And cons. Cost. Packaging.
The transportation
Purity
is unsustainable.
Yeah, transportation, sustainability, lower potency. Yeah, all those things. Yes, great, wonderful. Yeah, so some of the pros of herbs of commerce, allowing access to a wide variety of herbal medicines, you know, like Yasha said, like herbs that do not grow in your region, and allowing for cultivation of at-risk plant species. So 60 to 90% of herbs of commerce are wild harvested, but you know there are some really good organizations like United Plant Savers that are doing a lot of cultivation and preservation of at-risk plants. Pro, you don't have to grow them yourself. Accessibility, convenience, all those things that you guys mentioned. Cons, all these things that you guys mentioned too. One thing or a couple things that were not mentioned, geoauthenticity. So that's this concept that has actually been proven in labs too, that the plant, when it's growing in its environment that it's native to, for example, maca. If you grow maca, if you harvest it from its native environment, high altitude, it's going to have a lot more of the qualities that people actually use maca for, like a lot of the more constituents that people go to maca for. But if you cultivate it in an environment that it's not native to, it's actually not going to have as many of those qualities. And that's true for a lot of different herbs. And then the other thing is the medicine not being used properly. So like, you know, in these supplements that are on the market, there's so many things on the market that are, well, for one, that there's adulteration of things on the market, things that say they are what they're actually not, and there's dosaging issues a lot of times. If you're, like you look at the back of a supplement and it has 25 herbs in it in one capsule, it's like that's not going to actually give you the amount of herb that you need to have the therapeutic effect that that pill or that, that capsule, that bottle says it's having. So that's actually, could be considered wasting that herb because you're not really using it in a therapeutic way. It's just a marketing thing. And then there's like products that, say things like Avena Sativa for mood support. Okay. I don't know about that. Maybe. But it's, people just buy whatever it's marketing, right? So like if someone feels like they need mood support, they're going to buy Avena Sativa that says mood support on it, even though that might actually not help them at all for mood support. So but there's a lot of things like, Avena Sativa it's a neurotropic restorative. It's very nourishing for the nervous system, but only in tincture form. It's a nutritive otherwise. So, yeah, it could potentially support the nervous system. Anyway, that's a whole thing. Some other cons of herbs of commerce are all herbs of commerce are sterilized. It's actually not legally required, but it happens just to prevent any, types of contamination. And processing too. So herbs of commerce are typically processed and dried in the sun. And when you have like aromatic herbs like mints and stuff, that's going to take out a lot of the medicinal qualities. So some more cons of herbs of commerce, like I think everyone kind of mentioned this, specifically overuse and overharvest. So one of the things that's really, really important to look for when you're buying herbs of commerce is if it says it was wild harvested, or even if it doesn't say it was wild harvested, if the herb that you're buying is on the species at risk list, you really want to make sure it's being ethically done and done in a sustainable way. And that's probably going to mean that it's being cultivated rather than wild harvested. So like wild crafted and wild harvested are really big buzzwords, and people see that and they're like, oh, it must be better. It's not necessarily true. Like, it can be in certain instances, but when you're producing these massive amounts of herbs, wild crafted, we're going to talk about this, I think, in the next couple slides, like this specific example with white sage, it might not actually be better. So before buying an herb, you also have to consider, like, can I grow this? Can I forage it? Is it more sustainable, grown or foraged? Do I trust the source? Do I know enough about the proper use of this plant or medicine to actually be foraging it, to be growing it, to be, buying it? So yeah, this article I think is really, really useful. It's from United Plant Savers. So this is just 2 quotes from this article by United Plant Savers, which is the organization that I was talking about earlier. They are incredible. I was exposed to them in Ohio when I lived out in Athens. They do a lot of really important work with saving and cultivating, and not necessarily cultivating for use, for like selling and use of products, but for just saving species at risk. And they sponsor places all over the country that also do the same thing. So I guess I can just read these. So, and both of these quotes make 2 really good points, and I think that this case study kind of ties together herbs of commerce, the cons of herbs of commerce with the cons of wild harvesting and ethical harvesting, or non-ethical harvesting, I guess. So it can be frustrating when attempts to inform stores who sell sage bundles respond that they are getting their sage from those that claim sustainable harvesting techniques and have all the right verbiage on their social media and websites. Consumers and retailers need to understand laws in regards to wild plants, because even if one's techniques are sustainable, if it is not permitted, then it is illegal. A first step for a buyer or consumer is to ask to see a permit. And then white sage is abundant, and it's, okay, well, actually, let me talk about what the point that this first quote is making. And, you know, it's like, hold on. Okay, I'll just read the second one. White sage is abundant in its local habitat as a keystone species of its plant community, but that habitat is under threat due to development, and it is fragile, apparent by the many endangered and threatened species that rely on its habitat. Most important to note is that it can be grown, and if it is to be in any form of commercial trade, and certainly on the scale it is now, the only sustainability claim should be that it is coming from a cultivated source, and a buyer should always visit the farm to verify that claim. So this is, you know, kind of making the point that if a plant is abundant in a specific area, it doesn't mean that it's abundant everywhere at all. So even if, you know, this is, OSHA is another great example of this. It's extremely over-harvested. It's a really trendy plant right now, and it's very abundant on the western slope of Colorado, but it's pretty much the only place that it's very abundant right now. And it's being over-harvested by just, you know, wildcrafters and by companies who are using OSHA in their products. Yeah. So this quote is from that same article from a Tongva elder. She says, "We do not sell white sage. If you need it as a medicine and we have it, we're going to give it to you. We discourage selling medicine plants, spiritual plants, because we don't know if the person collected them in a good way with a good heart. But if you have white sage growing in your own backyard, you would know because you are taking care of it." And I just really wanted to include that too. I think it's really great that they, in writing this article, went to an elder to ask what she had to say about this topic. So essentially what is happening with white sage is it's being harvested off of an area. It's a preserve, actually, that seems to be very abundant, and people are saying that it's, you know, then they're selling it to places, you know, like, Urban Outfitters and natural grocers, and like all these places, you know, if you see packaged little bundles of white sage and it says wild harvested, there's no way to know if that was harvested legally at all or illegally with a permit or whatever. In a lot of places, it's just not even possible to get a permit to harvest some of these plants. It's actually just illegal, but these companies and people buy it anyway because they're not checking these things. Okay, so bioregional herbalism pros. So it often solves a lot of the issues of herbs of commerce. You know, the medicine's going to be fresher, more potent. The geoauthenticity bit that I was talking about, those medicines that are native to that place, there's going to be more potent medicine in those medicines. No need to sterilize. It can be more environmentally friendly and sustainable. And you're going to have that connection to the medicine, having that relationship to the medicine. The development of the potency of the medicine, I think, comes from having that relationship to it. And then, like, you know, wildcrafting is its own type of medicine. Going out into the forest, sitting with a plant, taking the time to find a stand and form a relationship with that stand, going back year after year, even before you harvest that plant, and to, you know, see what the growth of that stand is like. That's its own type of medicine, getting you, allowing yourself to slow down and to make that connection with the medicine that you want to harvest. Yeah, so, and then by forming those relationships, they're more likely to offer a deeper type of medicine. So, this is OSHA, and it, like I was saying before, it's one of those plants that's being over-harvested, And, the companies, especially that are going in and harvesting these things, they're not doing it with intention, reverence, respect. And that's just such an important part of harvesting any plant, of taking any plant from its natural environment, is really doing it with really big intention and asking permission and sitting with it and not just going. I mean, when I first got into herbalism, like 8 years ago, I definitely did this. I would take way too much, way more than I needed. I probably still have a few tinctures from when I took a whole basket of comfrey or lemon balm, and it's just I'm not gonna use I'm not selling it, I'm not gonna use that much. So that's another big part of it, is taking what you need. And if you're just getting started, you don't need much, because you need to know, okay, so I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but harvesting just a very small amount when you're first starting to wildcraft or first starting to harvest medicine, even if it's medicine that you're growing, and seeing how it goes and seeing what it's like, how much you actually use it. Are you going to give it to someone? Just really starting very slowly and with intention. If you're harvesting, wild harvesting, leaving something, so you're not just taking, but leaving an offering of some kind. Maybe that's a song, maybe it's some tobacco, hair, something. So you're not just taking, you're also giving back. Okay, so like I said, I was getting ahead of myself. But what things might we want to consider if we are going to think about ethical harvesting? How to harvest wild plants in an ethical way? Anyone?
You already touched on this, but I know there's a lot of indigenous practices that I've heard of never taking the first plant, because you don't know if that's the last plant, and then never taking more than half of what you see, so that there's always enough for the rest of the community. I think that's something to consider, especially from all of our point of view of people who care about our planet and the non-human community. They need to be considered as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of it is, if you are going out to harvest a specific plant, definitely not taking the first one that you see. Is there another bigger stand around the corner that you haven't gotten to yet? Really not being in a rush, really taking your time and figuring out, maybe not even harvesting that day, and just really figuring out, where the places that you want to go to that are abundant. And I would say not even taking 50%, 5% is usually what is, there's not really a standard percentage that you can really say. For something like mullein, that you go into a field and it's just so much mullein, it reproduces very quickly and it's invasive to a lot of species. So that's something that maybe you do take 50% and it's going to be fine. Mullein's abundant all over the country. It's not at risk at all. But for a lot of things 10%, 5%, 1%, it's all going to really depend on a lot of the bigger, on all of the things that we're going to be taking into consideration, which there's so many questions to ask and so many things to consider. So anyone else, things to consider?
The specific regeneration cycle of that particular plant. So for example, there's certain cacti, when you harvest them, they just grow from the part that you cut off, but at the same time, you could even double the size of your garden when you harvest it instead of reducing it by making sure that you cut you just take the middle part and replant the top again, because they keep growing that way. So, but other plants might work differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that's a big part of knowing a lot about the plant that you're harvesting too. You want to make sure that you know how it reproduces, what's the life cycle of that plant, so that you can actually do it in a good way. Yeah.
Attitude of gratitude.
Yes. Great.
Not pulling the plant up from the roots, but just taking some from the top or whatever piece you need so that it can just keep growing.
Mm-hmm.
The question of do you have permission on many levels?
The thing that you brought up about not pulling up the root, if you are harvesting the root, of course, like doing that in a way that you don't damage, that you damage as little around it as you can, you know, make as little impact when you're harvesting that root as you can.
No, you can keep going.
I think something to consider is the time of year you're harvesting in, and particularly like what other food sources are available for the animals around at that time. So like in the winter is a good time to harvest rose hips, but if you're in an area where there aren't many rose hips, that could be the only food source for certain animals that time of year. And then in the spring, like with the first blossoms like the lilacs and dandelions, that's the first food for pollinators. So just being at that point in the season, like more conservative with how much you're harvesting. But then as more things are blossoming, you can harvest more. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really great point, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so everyone mentioned some really great things about, so I wanted to say something about the roots too. So if you are harvesting a root, and this kind of goes with what Yasha was saying too, like you really want to know the best way to support life, because that's ultimately what we want to be doing. Like we don't just want to be taking things and reducing life. We want to always be supporting life. So there's a lot of ways to do that, and it's all going, that's why I was saying it's kind of a big topic to cover in this amount of time, because it's really going to be independent, like it's specific to each individual plant that you're harvesting, knowing how that plant works, when it reproduces, like what time of year, if it flowers, like when it flowers. There's so many things to consider, but if you are harvesting a root, one of the best times to harvest roots as far as medicinal properties is in the fall or after like the first frost, because it's going to send a lot of its energy into the roots to prepare for winter. So its vitality is going into the earth, into the roots. But yeah, so some of the essentials are knowing the at-risk plants in your area, knowing the endangered plants, the rare plants, and not harvesting them, and having the reverence and respect to not harvest them. And that doesn't mean not having a relationship with them, not sitting with them, talking with them, even maybe tasting like a nibble of their leaf if it's safe. Like that's all fine, but you know, like resisting the urge to be, you know, a trendy harvester. Being able to identify plants is so important, and you should always have 3 identifiers or more, but being able to, you know, for example, like the leaf shape, the texture of the leaf, if there's a smell, you know, the stalk shape, like all of these things are ways to identify plants. So having 3 or more ways to identify a plant. And I'm going to demonstrate why that's very important in another slide. Harvesting with respect and reverence, making offerings, we talked about all that. Harvesting only what you need. Determining whether a harvest is ethical and sustainable, and all of these questions that everyone's mentioning and that we've been talking about are all part of that. Learn all that you can before harvesting. It's really important. Like I was just saying, like there's just so many things to consider, and the more that you know, the better it's going to be. So there's a lot of things. If you like Google ethical harvesting, there's a lot of things that come up. a lot of really good articles and stuff. So I tried to like condense all of the information into like these points, in which a lot of the stuff we already talked about too. Like don't be in a hurry, scouting to see if there's more than one population, being prepared with your proper materials and equipment. So this kind of goes with like knowing as much as you can about the plant that you want to harvest, because for example, like something like arnica, if you're going to go harvest that, you need to bring your mason jar and your alcohol with you, because the qualities, the medicinal qualities of that plant, they're going to degrade almost immediately after you harvest it. They're going to start degrading really quickly. So you need to preserve it in a little bit of alcohol if you're going to make an oil with it immediately after harvest and then you take all that stuff with you in your pack and preserve it in the woods, in the forest before you leave. So there's just like stuff like that you want to make sure that you know about the plant. Stand awareness and relationship. Again, things that I've kind of been mentioning. Going to a stand over time, seeing how your harvest is actually affecting that stand, and if it's affecting it negatively, then reevaluating what you're doing. If you're harvesting a plant that has like seeds on it already, spreading those seeds in that area. If you're harvesting a root, not taking the entire plant but just a piece of it and then reburying what you can. Tending to your patch over the years to make sure that it stays abundant. All of those things are really important in just having that relationship to the stand. And then also like really considering like not telling anyone about your stand, or like not telling too many people. In our herb school, they made it very apparent to us that they had to stop taking classes to certain places, and when they did, because people would go back and just over harvest things, and when they did take us to certain stands, they never took us to abundant stands so that we wouldn't be tempted to like go and harvest from that stand. They would always take us to places like that had like a couple plants that they knew were there on like herb walks and stuff in the forest. And all of our teachers have private secret stands that they don't tell us about. So it's a thing. So you have to go out and find your own. Yeah. And then awareness of the environment and the ecosystem. So like just being aware of what's going on. Like if there's a drought going on, considering what the effect on the plants are at that time, maybe not harvesting at that time. Using caution when harvesting plants that are at the outer limits of the geographical range. So for example, like I wouldn't harvest OSHA anyway, but like there is some OSHA that grows on the eastern slope, and if I was going, I wouldn't harvest it, but that's an example of like being very careful, because that is on the outer limits of its geographical range. So there's a lot of plants like that where like, you just want to be aware of that. And then only harvesting from like non-contaminated, clean areas, because there's a lot of places that are sprayed, and we know all of that. So just being really aware of that. Supporting growth. Just considering your impact. Leaving healthy seed-producing plants in the population, like if there's like, the big plant, like the grandmother plant, leaving that one, obviously not harvesting that one, grandmothers and grandfather plants. Replanting root crowns, and then always leaving the area better than you found it. Fill in your holes if you're digging anything up, step lightly. Try not to trample all the flowers and stuff in the area that you're harvesting. Really just be really aware of what's going on. And also, like, don't leave discarded plant pieces lying around where other people can see them, because then people are like, oh, someone was harvesting here, and what were they harvesting? Being opportunistic. So one example of that is, like, if you're harvesting barks or buds off of trees, chestnut bud is an example of that. then going after a storm when like branches have already fallen down and being opportunistic in that way. And, you know, making sure you have permission, like Christina was saying, like legally too. So do you need a permit in your area? And then harvesting plants at the peak of their energetic potency. So like one example of that is like harvesting the roots in the fall. So with all of this information, how would we pose questions to ourselves before harvesting? Like what questions may we want to ask ourselves before harvesting in the wild? Yeah.
Is Ashke available to go harvest?
Do you need it? Yeah, totally.
This mic, it doesn't sound on, but it's actually being picked up for the recordings, so we do want to pass it around.
I mean, you could start with like, how well do I know this plant?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you said, like when does it bloom? How does it reproduce? What, you know, does it thrive on? And how can I best support this plant?
Yeah.
And then, I would also add, like, thinking about what you're going to make with that particular plant. Are you going to dry it? Are you going to make a tincture? Are you going to do some other type of extraction? Because I think, as you were saying with the arnica, it sounds like some plants you want to do something in the field as opposed to bringing it home first. So.
I think a good question to ask is, who are the original people of that land? Who are the indigenous people who were here before you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like, do they still have access to the medicine that you're trying to harvest?
What instructions or advice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's a lot of questions. These are some of them. Am I in a proper emotional state to make a harvest? How much can I reasonably or realistically use? How abundant is this plant? Is it abundant widespread or only local? Is it a rare plant? Is the stand of plants healthy? What's my impact going to be on this plant? Are there other plants like this in the area? How old are these plants? Will my harvest result in the death of the plants? Is there a way to mitigate this? Like, in a lot of, some plants we tend to use the root of, but in a lot of cases, like, the leaf is also medicinal. Like, for example, Yellowdock is a root. Yellowdock is one that the root is typically used, but the leaf is also highly medicinal. How long will it take the harvested plants to grow back? Will my impact be noticeable? Is there evidence of others harvesting here? Will my harvest adversely affect the ecological balance of the stand or the intricate web of interrelations that ensure its continued existence? Are there animals or insects that depend on this plant for food or other uses? How will my harvesting affect those relationships? What is the terrain like? Will my harvest, including the path I take to arrive there adversely impact the integrity of a riverbank or cause erosion? I'm very picky about erosion, and when I really don't like when people walk off paths. I think it's really just like really important that we stay on paths in a lot of cases and on trails and stuff. So like, if you see a sign that says like, please don't walk here, like please don't walk there. Like, plants are trying to grow. Do I have the plant's permission? How well do I know this plant? Do we have a relationship? Yeah, okay. So those are just some questions. And I'm going to shift into actual plants that we can forage. So this is, again, just some that I'm familiar with. And there's probably plenty more that I'm not familiar with that maybe some other people here are. So if you have any other things that you know, any other plants that you know that are not on here, feel free to shout them out. Anyone have any questions about anything or about any of these plants on here, again, like I said, it's just kind of like a lot. But I'd be happy to talk about any of these plants, like the medicinal qualities of any of them, if there's anyone on here that anyone sees that like calls out to them in particular. I don't know, anyone? Thoughts, questions?
I just have a question. I just are very curious about what is the sumac.
Sumac.
Yeah, because sumac in Quechua is a word, so I am very curious about this one.
Yeah, so sumac is also, one of the common names is lemonade berry, and this is it, that plant right here. It's what I had Yasha put in his mouth the other day. And they're really delicious berries. It tastes like lemonade, so you can like put them, they're very cooling, sour, astringent, and you can just put them like in your water, and it's really refreshing and nice. Yeah, anything that has a sour taste is going to be cooling, so it's like lemonade berry. Yeah.
Wait, is that also skunk berry?
I don't know, maybe. I've not heard that common name.
Okay, my dad had called that skunk berry, and you put it in your mouth and you suck on it, and it has zinc. Is it the zinc that makes it sour? And it has the little hairs on it. Okay, my dad taught me that is a skunk berry bush.
Cool. Skunk berry.
Yes, I don't know. Maybe that, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's
interesting.
There's lots
Okay,
of
and then this plant is not the same as that one.
No, that's a different plant.
And this one, I know that the indigenous would take the seeds from the top when they were red and make flour out of it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think I've heard that. Yeah, does anyone know a name for this plant here? No, I don't think so. So it is Yellowdock. Yellowdock is everywhere. So I included these pictures because let's actually start from the beginning. So anyone know what this one here is?
Plantain.
Yeah, that's plantain. Yes. So plantain's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's all over the country. It grows everywhere. It grows in cracks. So there's two types of plantain mainly. There's Plantago lanceolata and Plantago. What's the other one? This is the broadleaf one, and then lanceolata is the skinny leaf one. I could talk about all these plants, how their medicinal qualities and stuff, but it might. Okay, so plantain is a really amazing vulnerary, so you can you don't even need like an extraction of it at all. You can just like grind it up, chew it up in your mouth, and put it on like a cut or a bug bite or a burn or something, and it works amazing. It's also really has a really amazing affinity for the lungs and for the gut. So I'm using it right now as a powder to help heal my gut, and then I was also using it when I had COVID to help heal my lungs. And anyone know what this one is?
Gumweed.
Yes. Yes. Put that one for you. So yeah, it's got this like really sticky like thing going on here. This is also everywhere. It grows mostly in the foothills here in Colorado. It's amazing. It smells incredible. And it is highly medicinal, specifically for it's like a really strong expectorant. And people also use it in oils for poison ivy and bug bites and stuff. Yeah, it also probably has carotenes in them, I'm assuming, because it's bright yellow, which antioxidant, good for your eyesight and your lungs. Yeah, I'm going to go back to this. Anyone else have any specific questions about this?
Well, it's interesting because my question was about plantain.
Okay.
I have a plant in my front garden that I was told was plantain, but it looks a lot more like the Yellowdock. And every year it comes back and I don't pull it because I know it's medicinal. And this year it's like huge, and I don't have the heart to remove it, but I don't know much about how I would use it. But yeah, it's just like a favorite little weed of mine that I let grow really.
Cool. Yeah. So if it is Yellowdock, that one right there.
Looks like that.
So Yellowdock is extremely nutritious. It's one of the uses is for pregnant and nursing mothers, and for people that are generally like anemic or iron deficient. You can use it, combine it with molasses, like in a stew, like cook it type thing. You can also make it like just a tea out of it. It gets combined with molasses. It helps people actually retain more iron and help take in more iron from their food. And the molasses, and it also has iron in it. So that's one use. It's also really great for like helping the liver start to detox things. That's what people typically use it for, is like a detox herb. It's a more gentle laxative, so good for like mild constipation, which is also one of the reasons it's used for pregnant mothers. Yeah, you can cook the leaves. I think the young leaves are typically like better in a stew, just more digestible. But yeah, the seeds are very easily spread. So I mean, this is all over Boulder County and probably around here. I just haven't seen it as much. But yeah, yeah.
Speaking of around here, I'm curious if you have any insights. Well, for one, I know we have already a diversity of plant and animal life on the land here. I'm sure some so-called weeds and plants with herbal and medicinal uses. I feel like I've seen, I don't know, dandelion or something around. But I'm curious if you have any idea as to like what plants that are growing here could be used. I know there's like really common ones that can even be used on wounds and like sucking out thing. Yeah. What do you say? Oh, I thought someone said something. But also, I'm curious, like, what plants might want, because we're talking about wild foraging, right? Which is different than cultivation, but then like in a space like this, or even just in the general region that we're in beyond this land, like what might grow more around here? Do you have an idea? And also, would it make sense to grow certain medicinal herbs more here intentionally?
Mm-hmm.
And like, are there herbs, for example, that instead of like an herb garden, which could be really cool, like just spreading like plants all over the land, that might just spread like, oh, that's useful, that happens to grow on this land now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about with Nicole about like the native plants and stuff. I mean, I know one thing that we are planting, that she said we're planting, is the clovers, the native clovers, which have similar medicinal properties to like red clover, trifolium pratense, which is like used medicinally most often. Yeah, and I mean, you know, things like prickly pear, cactus, and there's I'm sure there's a lot of medicinal stuff that is native to this area. I think gumweed, I've seen gumweed grow around here. We saw gumweed down at the place that we went to with Jerry and Michelle. What's that called again? Paint Mines, yeah. And then like, you know, just any like plantain would probably grow around here as like a weed. I mean, mullein would grow here for sure. What?
You said nettles, I said personally.
Nettles? Yeah, so nettles, I saw nettles down at the river, down at that park, Fountain Creek Park, down growing right next to the river. They typically, they like water, so that was, these are some of the plants that I think would grow well here is more of like a cultivated garden type situation, but a lot of them too are very resistant to drought, and once they're established, they don't really need a lot of watering. All of these mints, especially like rosemary and thyme and lavender. I mean, we have lavender and coming up in that perennial. We have a perennial bed in front of our garden beds over there that was planted by previous owners, and that lavender is coming up right now, and it doesn't need any additional watering. We don't water it at all, and it just does super well. So a lot of these perennials, once they're established, they just grow every year, and they don't really need much watering at all. But it is just about getting them established, just like with the trees and with anything that we are going to be growing here, just getting them established before we just kind of let them loose. But things like, like yucca, which I know that we have seeds for, and cactus, prickly pear and stuff, like those might not need as much like specific watering and stuff before they're just doing their thing. Yeah.
Slides available?
Yeah? Okay, I'm curious if anyone knows what this is.
Flower.
A flower?
Slide.
Wild rose.
Yeah, it's a wild rose, which also might grow here too. Goji berries might grow here too. Yeah, so that's wild rose, and then they make rose hips in the fall. So, yeah, they're amazing. Typically grow in the foothills. But I mean, like, what grows out here is something that I'm trying to figure out because, I want to grow a lot of native plants, and I'm really interested in everything that Nicole was saying the other day about like what, how the Sonoran Desert has so much diversity, and like what we can grow here that's going to do well. Anyone know what this is? Yeah, Uva ursi. I don't know who said that, but yeah. Uva ursi. Yeah, Uva ursi is it's very astringent and very drying. Typically used for urinary tract infections. Very, very effective for that. So this was the slide I was talking about earlier. Can anyone know which one? Does anyone know which one's poison hemlock and which one's OSHA?
Poison on the right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's giving me poisonous vibes on the right.
But Yarrow too, yeah. Yarrow's similar. I have a picture of Yarrow actually. So yeah, I just wanted to throw this up there just to make the point too. Like it's just you need to be able to identify whatever you are harvesting. This is Yarrow. So Yarrow is also similar. I think Yarrow is a little easier to identify though because it has those feathery leaves. These is the two more poisonous plants that are the two of the most poisonous plants in Colorado. So larkspur, monkshood. Don't eat those. So then I just have like some pictures of different types of herb gardens. And again, I'm just curious if anyone has any questions, any comments before I talk about this.
So, for one, I want to just say how much I love that you talked about like how to be in right relationship with harvesting, because it's something that I've been never taught, and I've been on herbal walks to identify them, but that's something that actually I've never been taught, and so that was really beautiful and something I'm going to carry with me from this. And one of the things that I'm thinking as you're showing these slides and speaking about it is I've actually never heard anyone build like an herbal first aid kit. And I'm curious if that would be something as you begin to cultivate on this land, or would be interested in if you know anyone that can help you identify the plants, and then you can harvest and start building your own herbal first aid kit so we can step out of like the Western medicine and start taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Herbs are really incredible at being helpful for first aid. Yeah, I mean, I know some people that have done herbal first aid classes. Sam Kaufman, actually, he's an herbalist that does herbal first responder. So you can get your first wilderness first responder certification alongside getting an herbal wilderness first responder certification. So that's pretty cool. Sam Kaufman. But yeah, I think that's a really great idea and something that's seems very accessible and easy and exciting to me. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to, this might be a really hard question, and I'm sorry. I just wanted to go back to one of the questions you said that we should be asking, which is, like when wildcrafting, to have an understanding of what your impact is on the local ecosystem. And as a complete and total beginner, all of this herbal stuff feels a little bit overwhelming in general, but to have a big picture view of your impact on like an entire ecosystem, I'm wondering what the best resources are for understanding that. And if it really comes down to finding someone with years and years of experience, or how else would you ever really know as a beginner what your impact really looks like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I can just tell you from my experience, I know I started studying herbs like 8 years ago, but I didn't really know what I was doing exactly until I actually went to school. I don't think that that's necessary for everyone. There's plenty of community herbalists that are incredibly knowledgeable, and there's plenty of resources about herbs and about harvesting from various sources, whether it's an online herb school, even just articles online. There's so many books. So, maybe I could put together like a simple resource list for these things, but there's so much information out there, and I know it can be really overwhelming, which is why I did go to school, is because I wanted to have a solid foundation, and I still have so much to learn about all of these things. It never stops. It's a lifetime of learning. But there's a lot of resources for all different levels of anything that you want to learn about or get involved in online. And I'm thinking of some like online herb schools that have like really simple courses right now. But as far as like knowing your impact, I really think it's just about paying attention to what your impact is and starting to be able to identify plants and like know what they are in your environment. I think is a really good first step for anything like that. Like these ones. So this is catnip. I'm actually just gonna pass it around. And catnip was one of the first plants, along with like lemon balm and a couple others, that I started to form like a relationship with a long time ago. And now anytime I see catnip, I know it, and I just see it. I can see it from 10, 20, 30 feet away, and just know, oh, that's catnip. And I don't know if I'm digressing or not, but I think like just even if it's just one plant, just like knowing that one plant, and just like really getting to know the plants that call to you, because like I think that's just how it starts. Like, oh, I'm really attracted to this plant, like, and then just figuring out like what is that plant about, asking it directly. And I don't know, does that answer your question at all? Yeah. Yeah.
I'll add one thing, because my dad's a gardener and herbalist, and every time I ask him about this type of thing, like how do you even get started, he always tells me this story about an apprentice who's peeling potatoes for dinner, and it's a massive pile. He's feeding like the whole sanctuary, and he asks the master, "How am I supposed to peel all these potatoes? Like, what am I supposed to do?" And he says, "One at a time." And my dad always, whenever I ask that, he looks at me and goes, "One at a time." And so, like, that's my only insight is, I think the same way, that's the only way I know, is like learn one plant and what eats it and how it relates with the other plants around it. And then once you know it, maybe start with one of the ones that, grows around it, or just one at a time. But I think the reason I'm not as knowledgeable is just because I haven't done it enough. Like, it takes a long time, I think. And schools help.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
So in general, would you say that you're pretty, assuming that you know what plant you're identifying, if you find a plant in your own land, how like your own backyard, let's say you live in a neighborhood, how likely is it that harvesting from a plant in your own backyard is going to have a negative impact on the ecosystem around you?
Yeah, so it's really just going to depend on all of the questions that we were talking about too, like mostly how abundant is it in your specific area. Like for example, in our area, and this kind of answers Yasha's question too, but she's not here, but there is some Artemisia species growing around here. There's like a few over here I've seen, there's a few over there, there's a few over there. So if I'm going to consider harvesting any of that, I'm going to consider is this plant abundant enough for me to harvest, and maybe it's abundant enough for me to harvest a very small amount. And then when it goes to seed, do I want to spread that seed over, the area, like on our land, so it grows in more areas on our land? It just like always supporting life. And like all of this isn't meant to say like don't ever harvest plants, so don't touch them or anything. Like it's really important to be in relationship with our landscape, especially the landscape that we're living on. I think that's one of the issues with like some of the conservation type things that happen. It's obviously all really important and good, and a lot of it's amazing, but there's some aspects of it that have created this like don't touch me, don't have a relationship with the land, like you are separate from the land type thing that kind of, I don't know, it takes away some of our ability to like be in relationship with our landscape. So yeah, I mean, I would just consider how much is there and how much are you trying to harvest, and really the question is, are you supporting life, and then paying attention to what happens when you do harvest it. Yeah, does that help?
Super helpful.
Okay. Yeah.
So I had question of thinking about this app, Verdance. How could we integrate that type of idea in with like herbal education? Like imagine if there was what I'm picturing is like an app where you could search what type of medicine you're looking for, and then it can tell you, appropriate resources to gather that in your area. Are you aware of any type of resource like that?
Well, I'm going to talk about the first part of that first. I think that's a great idea to integrate it with Verdance. I think just making a feature for herbs too, like trading herbs and selling, or giving for free or selling herbs as part of that. Herbs are so abundant. I mean, unless you are using something, like selling it, and like a lavender or a thyme plant, it's gonna just produce so much in a season if it's an established plant. So being able to share it with your neighbors through an app like Verdance, I think is a great idea. And then the second part about the education piece, I know that there are many sources of information for that type of thing. The School of Forest Medicine has a lot of good information on that. They also do a lot of courses, online free courses and online paid courses. Yeah, that's just one that I'm more familiar with. But there's so much, and there's like books and things. Yeah. Prescription for nutritional healing. Cool.
One thing that I thought of when you're answering that question is like something that I'm always seeing Ashke do while we're on hikes, besides telling me to stay on the trail, is like she's constantly just like reaching down and like picking a leaf and like rubbing it in her fingers and smelling it and tasting it. Or she's like handing me some weird berry to suck on and be like, try this, here, try this. And like there's so much stuff, you know, like on hikes that I've gotten a lot more familiar with just from like watching her and observing her, like, you know, learning the plants that are on the hikes and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's something that we were really encouraged and trained to do in our school, is just be really curious about what everything tastes like. A lot of things taste really bitter and really strange, but like that's how you get to know a plant on a deeper level, is like just tasting it. And even if you don't know what that plant is, like that could be another way of getting to know it. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, not the monk's head though.
This is kind of the part of the discussion from earlier, but a perspective that I wanted to share that I'm curious if you've heard about too, is that from a bioregional herbalism perspective, isn't it like the plants that are growing right outside your window is the ones that are going to heal you?
Yeah.
And one of my teachers has said before that the plants like mullein and all these other plants that are growing so prolifically around all the people are the ones that are actually here to heal the people. It's the community. It's like the community's medicine. It's like it's the abundant, accessible, safe medicine that's available to all, and it wants to work with us. And her perspective, she's actually been going into the mountains with us, but she pushes back on us. And she'll be like, we're not supposed to go up here for these plants. Like, the plants, they don't want to be near us. Like, they'll come near us if they want us. And it's like she's willing to entertain other perspectives, but it's always really interesting to hear about. So I just wanted to offer that as well to that discussion that you guys are having.
Was that Bridget?
No, it's Asia Dorsey.
I had a question. So I was curious if in your exploration of herbalism, you have reflected at all on what you feel the integration is between your relationship to your own Lakota Sioux ancestry as a descendant of the Lakota people that are native to the Great Plains here. Maybe not too much right here, but pretty much. And so, yeah, just anything between that. I know that a lot of your exposure to training with that, you know, those particular teachings has come through our interspiritual tradition here, but also through your relationship with your grandmother and so on. So I'm just curious if you've reflected at all on that in relation to herbalism as one of your other main passions as well.
Yeah.
Or what you feel the connection is there. Like, yeah, maybe it's a weird question. I don't know. I just wanted to ask it.
No, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. It's a good question. I have been trying to bridge my own studies, especially with, my school is Western Herbalism, which is a lot of cultivated plants that are native to Europe, that are tradition, like typically used in Western herbalism. In our school in particular, though, we studied a lot of the native plants to Colorado too, which is where a lot of my studies of bioregional herbalism have come in, is from those teachers that have brought that in. And in all of those experiences with those teachers, we talked and we sat and we reflected a lot on access that Native peoples don't necessarily have to the areas that they have harvested for, however long, like thousands of years. So yeah, it's something I've thought a lot about and have been interested in trying to bridge and figure out. The sage is a good example. So when I was on Pine Ridge many years ago now, there was just white sage growing everywhere, all over the whole area that we were in, and that was my first exposure really to actually seeing white sage grow in its natural environment and being asked to harvest it. So when I see white sage being sold places, I feel a little nervous about it. I would really like to get more in touch with some of the plants of the plains in particular and of this area, since it's where we're living now, and figure out just learn more about the plants that are native to the plains, because we've learned a lot about plants that are native to the foothills and the mountains and stuff. So yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't know that I have a specific answer, but it's a good reflection.
I think that answered it essentially. The it being a Western herbalism tradition definitely helped open the point. Yeah, that there's different lineages of it.
Yeah, there's so many different. You have Ayurvedic herbalism and Chinese herbalism and all of these different types of herbalism. So yeah.
Yeah, sure. What's the store in Manitou that's got the really, really good white sage?
Well, it may not be the type of white sage that Ashke is talking about, but there's sage for sale at, what is it, Camino Real, I believe? No, it's the other one. I forget the name of the store. The one up in Manitou? Okay, Camino Real. And all I know is that there's a native man who's connected to his tradition and his roots that harvests it in prayer in a traditional way. So that's kind of the law that I adhere to. Yeah. We might have time for a couple more questions, but maybe not too many.
Yeah, whatever.
Sorry, were you about to say something?
No. I was about to say if we have any more time for questions.
So I'm a bit of an herbalist myself. I haven't trained formally like you have. I've done more community-based and individualized study. And as folks have been talking about wondering how to get into it and how to start out, it kind of brought me to a personal realization that I wonder whether you resonate with, which is that for me, herbalism is a lot more like a lifestyle than a practice. So I notice that when I'm walking, my herb brain is always on. I'm always noticing the plants. I'm always doing the tasting. It's not I'm going to go forage today, so much as it is I'm on a hike and I'm just noticing my plant friends. I'm wondering what this one is and what that one is. And I wonder if you feel similarly, like you never just turn a switch on that you become an herbalist. You're just always in it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. I, throughout this whole the past couple years of being in school, I have not foraged at all because I've been in this just like I need to know as much as possible, and I need to like really have a relationship with these plants and just get to know them. So yeah, anytime I'm on a hike, I'm always doing that. So I completely resonate with that. Totally. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I guess very last question from Nick. Looks like Codner was about to get in this.
Okay, so I have like a two-part question. The first part is you showed a lot of awesome plants that we can plant in our own gardens, and I was wondering, just because I'm familiar with like mint and I know that it can very quickly get out of hand as far as sort of like just dominating the landscape. So I was curious if there's any other plants that you would caution us against planting in the ground, such that it will kind of take over. And then the second part to my question is, what are the ethics of cultivating invasive species, because they can kind of just like reproduce and sort of imbalance the native ecosystem?
Totally, yeah. So any mints, if you don't want them to completely take over your garden, you want to plant them in containers, in pots and in containers, because they will definitely they'll thrive no matter where they are. Now the other part of your question was the ethics of planting non-natives. Yeah, that's a really good question. And a lot of plants here that we see growing. So I guess how I'd answer that is not all non-natives are invasive. So checking, and if it is invasive, don't do it. And if it's not invasive, but there's a lot of non-natives that are not invasive, and those are, they're everywhere now. They're just like naturalized into our environment, and it doesn't seem, I think of it the same as like how people are kind of the same way now. Like, we're all just kind of, non-native and naturalized, and like, some people are a little invasive, but hopefully we can fix that.
They want to be harvested.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Just one more thing I would say is kind of a follow-up, which is more of like just an open question, is kind of like, at what point does a species go from being invasive to being the new native, right? Because if you look at like California, for example, eucalyptus were originally invasive in California, but they're just there to stay now, and they're now a part of the new normal, or the new ecosystems. Mm-hmm. So just kind of an open question on, where do we draw the line if something's been here for a century versus a decade? Just asking the question, if something's been around for years and years and years in an environment, at what point, if ever, does it stop being invasive? I think it's just it's a tough question to answer, and I think ecologists struggle with that. So
yeah, I really like this topic of conversation. It's something I think about a lot. I think it comes like, for me, it's like, is it infringing upon the diversity of other species? Which, the lack of the decrease in diversity is something that we're dealing with on a lot of different levels, with a lot of different things in the world, with whether it's culture, animals, plants, and at the same time, like, there's this idea of like the mullein, like the plant medicine that's coming to us when we need it, and where we need it. So yeah, I think it's a pretty complex topic, and something that is really interesting to talk about and get into. Something I think about a lot. Yeah, like when does it become just the new normal? Like at what point is it just there's not a way to like remake a landscape into 100% native. Like, what is native, right? Like, Europeans are integrated into, like, the same thing I was just saying about people, right? Like, who's native to where now, right? Like, there's obviously, like, native indigenous people that are, like, the true, like, indigenous natives, and that's how plants are, too. But if we're, like, taking care of the land and having good relationship with it, then, yeah, it's a big question, so.
I mean, even defining who the true indigenous plants or people are is a very relative human scale of time and so on.
Yeah.
If there's no like super fast last question, then I think unless you have any closing remarks, we'll move on. Is this?
I don't think so. Maybe just a closing picture.
Great.
Here, I want to find. Okay, there we go.
The flower slide.
Wild rose.
Wild rose. Cool, thank you.
Give it up for Ashke.
Our mission is peace.